Hello, I'm Howie Sheriff, and welcome to another show from You Call This Yoga, a show about accessible yoga where we invite leaders in our realm and practitioners who are expressing their style and perspectives of yoga. It's not necessarily about the asana or the movements, but how we're engaging our mind, body, and heart through breathing, thinking, and our actions in the world. Through the course of our weekly show, we've had wonderful guests who are pioneering or advancing even further concepts that exist. A gal who is from our area of North Carolina, and I say a gal because she's a real sweet person who is sharing her journey through a book tour now and has grown and bloomed in the process, is Jessamyn Stanley. I had the pleasure of meeting Jessamyn about 6 weeks ago as she participated in the start of her book tour in Raleigh, as well as in Yoga Fest NC, where she shared an Everybody Yoga program. I am an older guy, and I use guy and gal, so I wasn't being derogatory as an ageist. In our Explore, as I've come to learn from Jessamyn, having to been at her program, it's been really inspiring because she represents a lot of what You Call This Yoga seeks to provide. And You Call This Yoga, I believe, can represent some of what Jessamyn is seeking to advance. We'll learn more in just a little bit. We do invite you, the viewers and listeners, teachers, and aspiring yogis and practicing yogis to engage us at 919-518-9773. You can also log in on Skype at Computers 2K Voice, or you can join the chat by checking in and logging in via the Nissan Communications box that you're already logged on. Well, I've rambled plenty, and now it's time to check in with Jessamyn in Boston. Good morning, Jessamyn.
Good morning, Howie. I hope you're having a good day.
Oh, it's terrific, and you're here with us, so it's even better. So thank you.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Well, would you share with our listeners and viewers how it's going for you today, and how did you get there today? What's happening on the tour?
So I have an event tonight at Boston Public Library, and I'm coming from New York. I had an event on Sunday at BookCon, and then before that I was in the DC area. But this little leg of the tour has been very, very energizing, and it's been really beautiful to just be around so many students that some people that I've never been able to see because they take my online classes and we just haven't met yet, or people who don't know anything about yoga or just like found out about it on the radio and then they show up, and then people who have been following me for years and who have been having this like really intense awakening with their own practices. And so it's really amazing to be able to travel to so many different places and interact with so many people. So I feel very, very blessed.
And how are the audiences in terms of their demographics? Do they seem to be consistent throughout your locations? And would you explain who the audience might be for your book signings and experiences along the tour?
I mean, I think that all of the book events are pretty representative of the kinds of people that typically come out for any kind of event that I do, whether it's a class or a talk or anything like that. But I mean, there's no real guideline, or there's no real like specific demographics. It really crosses all socioeconomic levels, all races, all gender expressions, all ages, all I mean, so many different kinds of people. There would be no way for me to really like give a limit on it. And I think it's because I am not really expressing anything different about I'm not I think that a lot of people are like, wow, you must have this new perspective on yoga. I don't have a new perspective on yoga. My perspective is what yoga is, which is that it is meant for all human beings. Like if you can breathe, you can do this practice. And I think that the people who turn out are typically representative of that idea.
Mm, beautiful, which is what we're all trying to express is how
Mhm.
it's a universal experience, not necessarily a class experience or
Yeah,
some
absolutely.
isolated mode. Uh,
Mhm.
so I jumped into the show because I made a premise that folks may know who you are because you have a lot of media exposure and a lot of spirit in sharing how yoga can be accessible. But let's wind it back a little bit and share where you started experiencing yoga and how did you first learn of what yoga might be?
Yeah, so I was in graduate school and I was going through a period of depression, and one of my classmates encouraged me to go to a yoga class with her. And I said absolutely not because I had actually tried yoga once when I was in high school and had a really negative experience. And so when she suggested it again, I was very much like, I'm not trying to do this. It's not going to be for me. And I remember going, and I was the largest person in the room. I was frequently the only person of color, which is very strange when you really think about it. But I felt very isolated. But I also didn't realize that in my day to day life, I really was not challenging myself outside of any boundaries. I'd made a lot of rules for myself about what I was capable of doing, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. And the practice really requires that you challenge all of those things. That ultimately, when you're working on anything, when I mean, the asana is really just a vehicle to be able to look within yourself. So I found myself looking within myself in a way that I really had never been before. And it's something that I definitely it wasn't like an immediate love affair. I wasn't like, wow, this is just I feel so great about myself and everything is amazing. It was the kind of thing where like it kind of grows on you over time, and then you realize that when you're not doing this thing that you are sinking lower than you were. And I gained a lot of confidence through practicing, and it gave me the confidence to leave graduate school, which was making me so miserable, and to move to Durham where I live now. But when I moved to Durham, I could not afford to practice yoga in studios. It's something that we don't really talk about. Yoga in the modern world is extremely expensive and it's all based around money. And that was very inaccessible for me. And I started practicing at home just so that I could give myself this medicine that I really was becoming very reliant upon. And during that time, some sad things happened. My aunt passed away very unexpectedly. I talk about this in my book, Everybody Yoga, but I had a lot of reasons to really dig into the practice. And I started documenting it on social media only because I wanted to track my progress over time. Now, Instagram and all of these different things, they're all really different than they were when they first came out. In the beginning, it was very much like just college students and very serious yoga practitioners and teachers who were giving one another feedback about their practices. And because I was practicing at home, I wanted to feel like I was a part of a larger community. I wanted to feel like I was a part of something more and that I could watch my progress. And it became even now when I look back at my social media, all I really see is a journal of my practice that I've successfully kept for the last few years. It's not really like I don't really think of it as anything more than that, but the benefit of doing that is that I've been able to interact with so many people around the world who are like, wow, I never thought that I could practice yoga. Like I didn't realize how many people thought that fat people cannot practice yoga. And that was so confusing to me because I'm not even the first fat Black person to put pictures of themselves on the internet practicing yoga. You know what I mean? So I was like, we obviously just have a major visibility problem. In terms of how accessible yoga really is, we have a visibility problem. And it's been awesome that I've been able to also create more visibility. But ultimately, to me, I'm just living my practice. I'm just trying to show up on the mat for the same reasons as I always have.
Well, that's a beautiful base of growth to be reflecting on because it definitely didn't come from a place of ease. It came from a place of great distress. And as I was listening and almost trying to construe, well, what is our first pearl of wisdom? Because usually we do have recorded ones, but here we're going to derive them from Jessamyn, who is on the road and working us into her schedule, is how are we creating a little bit of challenge for ourselves each day that has a way of being constructive as opposed to destructive? Are we fostering some growth? Are there practices that we can build that has some regularity, that gives some fulfillment and engagement? So I invite that as question/pearl number one for our viewers and listeners. Can you weave some of that into your lives? We also do have some engagement with one of our fans of Jessamyn, our friend Trisha, who has a question that I have to read very specifically because that's just the way it is in being fair to Trisha. Let's open the message, please. Sorry, I got caught.
Hey, Trisha.
Meanwhile, Amnon, could you show the cover of Jessamyn's book? No, you can't? All right, then we'll get back to Trisha. But I'll paraphrase it for now. If you were to create a class or a session or a training of the ideal demographics of every body yoga, how would that vision be? Could you create a picture of who you're trying to reach and why that, if there's such an ideal picture?
Hey, Trisha. I don't really have an ideal picture like that. And I think that it's, for me, really helpful to kind of not really think about trying to reach people. I'm not like, yes, I want to make sure that all larger bodied women or all larger bodied men or all non-binary people or all, it's like there's so many different people who suffer. It's literally all of us. All human beings are dealing with something within themselves that they need to resolve that knows no demographic. And so to me, if I'm teaching yoga, if I'm practicing yoga and other people would like to join me, it's just whoever that is. It doesn't matter what the person looks like, because the people that we are physically is very, very, that's a very small piece of who we are overall. And I think that for me, if I'm going to be accidentally standing on a platform to reach people, I'm just going to try to reach whoever feels compelled. And it doesn't have I don't think that person specifically looks a certain way. And this is kind of coming from having seen so many different people who all have the exact same problems, like people across the world, people of different ages, people of different sizes. Like, it's so universal, way too universal to boil it down to specific groups. I hope that answered your question.
It's a wonderful answer because really it's almost as if a reverse discrimination potential exists of who do we think are the optimal. Then it becomes, well, why them and why not someone else of physical?
Yeah.
Ah,
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that a lot of people kind of, like you see me and it's like, wow, she can really reach larger bodied Black people. That's awesome. Larger bodied Black people deserve to have someone who represents them. And I find that that's really, I mean, even I have my own shady thoughts about that whole mentality. But even beyond that, the people who actually turn out to my classes have apps. I mean, it's literally any human being. Like, it's people who look like that, people who could be on the cover of Yoga Journal right now, like in the traditional mode of a yoga practitioner. It's people who, like, some people who cannot get out of a chair. It's like people who have, like, people who do not. I mean, it's way too many different kinds of people. And I think that we all can accidentally discriminate just based upon our very limited understandings of what the world is based upon who we are and the skin that we're sitting in. And it is a test for all of us truly to try to see beyond those limitations.
hmm. Well, another part of Trisha's question was, what would the class sound like? So maybe that's a question of what kind of musical mood or engagement might be present there too. So, in fairness to Trish, I'll give the rest of the question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's no specific sound that comes along with a practice. I mean, I guess that if it's like, if we're talking in a kind of a metaphysical way, I would hope that every human being would feel as though their experience is valid, that whatever sound they need to emit is totally welcome. If that is a sigh, if it's a cry, if it's a moan, if it is silence, that is totally acceptable. If it's gusting breath, if it's like quaky breath, that whatever it is you need to have happen can happen. And
Hmm.
I think that that sound is ultimately like the sound of acceptance and love, which is really all that you're trying to manifest in a yoga practice.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Trisha.
Thank you. Trish is a big uh, proponent of sharing accessible yoga. She was on one of our shows on curvy yoga.
Oh, dope.
So that's really delightful, and you probably saw her at Yoga Fest.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
so thank you. Um, Getting back to some of your journey and the progression after graduate school or deciding to leave graduate school is there. Did you get some formal yoga teacher training, and how was that experience?
I did. I went to a yoga teacher training at Asheville Yoga Center. I studied with Kimberly Perrier, and the school was started by Stephanie Keach. I did not want to be a yoga teacher, though. This was like a big sticking point for me. I had been practicing for quite some time, and I'd had a number of people reach out and ask me to teach them, people from all over the world. And I really did not want to be a yoga teacher. I was walking down a completely different path in life. I did not feel like there was a necessity for me to be a yoga teacher because there are literally thousands of yoga teachers. So when people would email me or message me, I would recommend other yoga teachers. I would recommend other classes. I would be like, you don't need for me to come teach you. You should just there's so many different avenues to get into it. But the pressure was so immense, and I realized that obviously I do need to do this to some degree, but I still could not afford to go to yoga teacher training. And I did not, again, with how we don't talk about this, but it's very expensive to do these things. And I was in debt from a graduate degree that I have yet to finish. So like there wasn't just extra money lying around to do this. And I ended up in a situation where I was able to finance it, and I went and I really do think about my practice. It's very much before I went to YTT and after YTT. Because before, I saw my practice as something that was very much like a superficial act. It's something that I do. Even though it's something that, that I love and that I do frequently and that is a huge part of my life, it was still I would call it a very superficial understanding. And honestly, I think that that understanding is where most people stay with the practice, where it's like, oh, this is something that I do on Saturdays or that I do every day or whatever. And I think that's totally fine. But when I went to training, I realized that the reason that because I thought I was going to go to YTT and just learn a bunch of stuff, like learn a lot about alignment, learn a lot about history, learn, how to communicate better, and that will make me be a yoga teacher. But that really the way that you teach is by living your own practice and then reflecting that practice to other human beings. And through the experience, I really started to look within myself in a way that I had not been before. And it allowed me to crack open pieces of myself, my true self, not the self that is out on display for other human beings, but it allowed me to look within myself in a way that was so profound and continues to be so profound, and that is always evolving, and that is so much bigger than I ever anticipated when I first went to that very first yoga class. I never expected to be able to look inside myself in the way that this practice has allowed. And I realized that the reason there have to be so many yoga teachers, and quite frankly, why everyone should be a yoga teacher to some degree, is because the experience that we can individually reflect onto other human beings is so important, because it can give another human being the opportunity to do that exact same work within themselves. And that not every person will have a positive reaction to your way of understanding this practice. That's why there have to be so many. And that not everyone is going to my practice is not going to resonate for every human being, but it could resonate for one person. And that to me was enough of a motivating factor to say, okay, well, I guess I will try to reach the people who ask me to come teach them. And so I had been teaching my friends before that, but I wasn't doing it I wasn't doing it seriously. But literally right after I left my training, I said on social media, where do y'all want for me to come teach? Everyone has asked for me to come teach. Where do you want for me to teach? And they literally said essentially everywhere on the planet with the exception of Antarctica. And so in my mind, I'm just working down that list, trying to reach every person that asked me to come teach them and I can't physically reach every person. And that's why, you do online classes so that people can take classes from a distance. And then there's people who are too scared to even walk into a yoga studio. And so you write the books to reach that person. And then, to me, I ultimately am still just living my practice like I was from the very beginning, so that I feel like I will teach yoga until I am not meant to teach yoga anymore. But I hopefully will continue to live this practice for the rest of my life, because I don't think that it wasn't like a career move for me. It wasn't like, oh yeah, this will be great. Like I can make some money being a yoga teacher. Like maybe one day I'll open a studio or something. Like I don't have goals like that. That wasn't my mindset. It's very much like, obviously I've been called to do this at this point in my life, and I will do this work for as long as I'm meant to do it.
Beautiful. Well, let's give Jessamyn a moment to catch her breath, because she's definitely sharing some wonderful perspectives. And from that, I think I was able to crystallize another pearl to build onto the first one. The first one was, how are you challenging yourself in a constructive way each day? So that pearl is necessarily of wisdom, but it could be of reflection. And then similarly, what does a yoga teacher look like to you? Slash, how are you a yoga teacher? Period. And what is your message? Really, what is your yoga? Is it asana? Is it mindfulness? Is it meditative? Is it love and devotion? Is it service? Each has their own way of expressing and experiencing yoga. And that's the part about accessible yoga, is that we have different opportunities to express this. Jessamyn's been called to be a teacher, but she's also teaching by example, which is similar in a very close way to our guest last week, Pashupati, whose name comes from the idea of teaching by example. And that's what his name are derived from. So the name can be pretty ubiquitous throughout the concept of teaching. So teachers, we invite your perspective, and what is your Sanskrit name and mission in your teaching? And students and practitioners, feel free to engage Jessamyn or myself or others on how would you like to experience your yoga practice in a more accessible way? We're going to explore a little bit more by my question, hopefully, with Jessamyn about how um, this vision of teaching crystallized on social media and where her sense of this Instagram process and media is going so that accessible yoga can be shared more easily. What are your thoughts, Jessamyn?
So I have a lot of conflicting feelings about social media. I think that obviously there are a lot of benefits in the fact just the idea that like the modern yoga narrative, the what is projected for everyone in the world is that of a white slender woman practice like a white slender educated uh wealthy woman practicing and spending money on leggings and mats and coconut water, and like that's the only image that's seen in the mainstream. So in a large way, social media is very important because it shows something different than that, because the fact that that's the major narrative, that is problematic ultimately. But I think that social media, Instagram specifically, creates space for community that can't really happen otherwise. I think that being able to communicate with people who live all over the globe makes people who maybe feel really isolated in their own yoga communities. Like, you live somewhere where there are no other people who look like you practicing yoga at all, and you don't see anyone else who looks like you. It's very helpful to be able to go online and say, oh, this is my friend in blank place, or this is my friend in blank place, and then you can interact in that way. So I do think that all of that is beautiful. I Unfortunately, I think that those aspects are overshadowed by the fact that the social media can really trivialize the yoga practice, and it has created a lot of conflict for me on a personal level, because while I do think that you know again, I think the benefits are amazing, but I just think that it makes, for non practitioners, it seems as though yoga is very much like handstand worship or something. Or it's like people are trying to, it just becomes this thing where it's only about the physical body, it's only about the physical practice. And that's such a short sighted way to see the practice. And then, in addition to that, you get people who become really, really popular on social media, and then they allow that kind of attention to become the feeding flame of their practice, so that they're trying to get their poses to look a certain way, specifically so that they can take photos of it to show other people, to get likes, to get followers. And that is such a dangerous path, not just because of the obvious connotations that come along with it, but because that's literally the antithesis of yoga. The idea of like trying to look anywhere but within yourself for the answers to life. That's like is the opposite. So I feel like the in my mind, the negatives of social media are overwhelming ultimately. I don't really find that I don't really think that social media, Instagram specifically, is really good for the yoga community at all. And I've said many times that if I did not already have my social media accounts, I would not have them, because I just don't think that they're great. And I never recommend to other teachers, like, I'm not like, oh yeah, you should get an Instagram and be posting pictures. Like, I just feel like it's really disgusting, honestly. But a couple of years ago, I had a moment where I was like, because, and just to piggyback on that last idea really quickly,
Sure.
I never say like, yeah, get an Instagram, but then at the same time, like this is knowing that in our in our current society, there's no way to market yourself as a yoga teacher without having social media. Like that's not a thing. It's the message. It's the bulletin board of 2017. So like, if you can go without it, absolutely. But if you would like to make it, if it's going to be your job, it seems to be like a necessity to some degree. But I feel like I have a lot of conflict with that. And so a couple of years ago, I almost deleted all of my social media because I was just so like, I was like, what is the point here? What is the purpose? Is the point to get likes? That can't be the point. What is the reason that we can all communicate in this way? Why can I speak to someone who is in Hong Kong practicing yoga and then at the same time be talking to someone who's in Philadelphia and then at the same time, excuse me, be live streaming my practice or like what is the purpose for all this communication? And I came to a place of feeling like the reason that we can communicate like this is so that we can really enhance the idea of what it means to be a yoga practitioner, so that we can expand not just on the physical definition, because everybody gets hung up on the body. It's all about like showing different bodies of people practicing yoga. That's very, very short-sighted ultimately, because yes, anybody can do this practice. If you can breathe, you can do this practice.
Mm-hmm.
But a step beyond that is, what are the things that we don't talk about about yoga that are yoga just as much as the poses that people want to take photos of? The things that we don't talk about are the conflicts that actually come up within ourselves, the things that actually, like the way that we are interacting in our communities, the way that we interact in relationships, the way that we build professional work, the way that we reflect on bad experiences, the way that the practice actually affects us. And I feel like what I try to do in my social media is just continue to have authentic observations of the world around me, because that is my yoga practice. You see people talking about yoga and they're only talking about poses. That's not really where the yoga comes into play. It comes into play in these interactions and in our observations. And so to me, the benefit of social media is that it does create space for that kind of work to happen and that kind of reflection to be made public, because in my eyes that's what really makes people want to practice, and that's what really connects people to specific teachers. Even I think that everyone who has a really profound connection to their personal yoga practice, it's not because, wow, I just love the way my body looks in King Dancer pose. No, it's because this is the practice that allows you to look within yourself to some degree, and that it allows you to deal with things that maybe you haven't made space to deal with, like the death of the death of a loved one, an injury, like lifelong self-hate, depression, there's addiction, there abuse. There's so many different things that we don't allow ourselves the space to speak about publicly. And I think that those are really the things that make people like obsessed with yoga. And so to me, social media is an opportunity to shine a light on that as well. And that, because ultimately it's like, when people talk about, yeah, we should get more people practicing yoga, like everyone should come out to yoga classes. Why? Why should everyone come out to yoga classes? Why? So that people can spend money on classes, so that studios won't have empty classes. Is that why? Because that's not a reason in my mind. Like, I feel like that's capitalism's reason. And capitalism, again, is the opposite of yoga. So it's all about trying to make space for us to move beyond what the modern yoga world has created, which is really a bubble of capitalism.
Oh, all right. Well, that is substantial. Thank you, Jessamyn.
Thank you.
So, viewers and listeners, let's take a breath, because Jessamyn has experienced lots of publicity through social media, but it's also has its two-sided or multi-sidedness of social media. Uh, she's also, in my mind, justifying this show, because what we're looking to do here is to share other elements of yoga that are accessible. Our organization also travels in that same mantra of creating channels for accessible yoga that are physical practice for all age groups. Jessamyn does have a book called Everybody Yoga, which is also very cute because one of the early names of our nonprofit was Everybody Yoga.
That's fun.
Yes, it's one of the many names of our organization before it became You Call This Yoga. And Here we have an opportunity to flash on screen the cover of Jessamyn's book. Thank you, Amnon. All right, there she is. Great. So Jessamyn is an author, as we have intimated, and she is on a book tour. Jessamyn, back on the media topic before we take our fun and yum good health tip break,
Mm.
could you share your website and any preferred contact channels?
Yeah, totally. My website is jessamynstanley.com. It's JESSAM like monkey, YN like Nancy, Stanley, STANLEY. And that's where you can get my teaching schedule, both local and national and international, and my online classes. And that's where you can find the book. And you can find me on social media as either my name is Jessamyn or Jess Not Jazz.
Jess Not Jazz?
Mm-hmm.
All right, excellent. Well, viewers and listeners, we've been promoting Yoga Fest Raleigh, which is coming up to raise funds and participation for our programs in Southeast Raleigh for youth, teens, the elderly, and the working uninsured. We have Barbara Vosk teaching this Saturday at Alliance Medical Ministry. Taking a break from that PSA in video, we're back to our fun and yum good health tip, and let's see what we can share for your good health and fun. It's a bountiful season, and we're very fortunate to have beets from the Well-Fed Community Garden picked yesterday. Beets are interesting because we have the bulbs, which we'll be roasting, and also the leaves, which we'll be sauteing. Of course, we'll be picking and cleaning and doing all these other preparations, and eventually show you some of the ingredients that we add, which is basically garlic, olive oil, and balsamic vinegar for the leaves, and olive oil spray with some foil wrapped for in the oven. I've got the beets ready. I've got 4 beets. 1, 2, 3, 4. Just kidding. Just gonna lightly spray the beets. Notice I have all the foil here laid out so that it captures whatever is excess. And okay, we've got that going. Gonna wrap these up, get them on the tray, get them in the oven, which is at 400. Why am I going so swiftly? Well, not only because of time, but because I've got the olive oil on the stove already heating up. So we're just wrapping these up. Stove is ready. Kitchen timer, let's say 45 because they're not that large. Gotta wipe my hands because I'm all olive oiled. All right, just whoops. Got a little thin layer of olive oil in the pan. Got 1 clove of garlic. Away from the face. And making sure I didn't overheat the pan and burn the garlic. Just get the oil flavored. Important after you wash the greens is to make sure they're dry so that you don't get splatter. And I like to just toss the greens in the oil and make a mess, which is fun. See what comes out, spin it around. That's why I do this part last. All right, we've got the cover. And we'll see you back in a little bit. Ta-ta for now. Well, it's been almost 25 minutes in cooking the greens. They're pretty done. They've cooked down a fair amount, as you can tell. Just gonna add a splash of balsamic vinaigrette. Not a splash on me, please. Come on, yeah. And just stir it around. And then we'll see what happens with our salad with our butter crunch lettuce from the well-fed garden. And here's our finished salad with some roasted pine nuts and our very nutritious beet greens sauteed and finished off with balsamic vinegar. Fun and yum. Let's eat. Well, wasn't that appetizing? That's another one of our one-take wonders in our kitchen. Beets are very nutritious, and they're also high in carbohydrates. So that's why sometimes other beverages are made with beets, because they're sweeteners. So diabetics, be mindful, especially of beetroots. But beet is also considered a superfood, and you can have it two ways: by having leaves, which are sauteed and have lots of minerals in them and vitamins, as well as the other properties that are in the bulbs. Jessamyn, have you had many beets in your life?
I have. When you were talking about them, I was like, oh, I wish I was having beets right now, actually. I usually drink beet juice in my smoothies. I love that. I love it so much.
Yeah, it adds a
It's
lot.
so good for you.
Adds a lot of flavor, but they have a little asterisk about one of the sweetest elements, and especially the roots. I heard or read this morning that putting roots in smoothies can really jazz up the sweetness factor.
Oh,
But
I'll
you,
have to keep that in mind. I usually just get the juice like from the store and then put beet juice in
yeah,
because I'm really lazy about juicing. I don't like cleaning out the juicer.
excellent. Well, I can appreciate that. We have a little garden in the back of our house. Not the well-fed garden. That's the whole nother experience. But yes, it's
To go with
about
that.
trying to get as close to the relationship with the plant as possible. So I can
Totally.
appreciate that. Uh, so what is it like to be on a book tour, and how does that affect some of your physical yoga practice as well as your mind and body experience? Because traveling can be rough for a yogi or any individual.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really physically and emotionally and spiritually difficult experience. Like just the pace of the tour is very intense. Like to be constantly like in two airports a day at some points and to be doing so much media talking to people who do not respect yoga and quite frankly who have a low opinion of larger body people and to be even more specific, who have a low opinion of Black larger body people. It's a lot to do, like a bunch of different interviews throughout the day in which people are like, so, yoga, fat person. What's that like? So that's kind of a lot. And then, it as amazing as it is very emotionally difficult for me to take in all of the love that is given to me by people who come out to my signings and to my classes because it is so overwhelming. The response to the book is so overwhelming that I am very much like when I'm not doing a signing or when I'm not teaching a class, I am at the hotel and I'm not doing a media event, I'm at the hotel practicing yoga by myself or sleeping because there's no way to be able to emotionally and spiritually handle the weight of it because it's a lot. I think that for people who enjoy this kind of work, it's usually people who are maybe sitting in a space of narcissism, which I think is totally understandable, completely understandable. And honestly, I don't have any shade on that at all. But I'm really trying to move away from that space within my own life, and so it's a lot to take in and to absorb. But that being said, it's it is so it is such a positive experience in a way that I cannot really express in words.
Hmm.
And I think that being able to interact with so many other human beings. When I think about the number of people who like never leave their hometown or who work in a cubicle all day and they never get to interact with other human beings, and to have an opportunity to consistently be surrounded by so much positivity is really it's a gift in so many different ways. So for me, that's something that I try to keep in mind. I do try to maintain my personal practice as much as I can. I woke up a little bit too late today to practice this morning, but I'll practice this afternoon. It's something that is not to me necessarily about like, oh yeah, I want to keep up my fitness, I want to keep up my practice. It's like, no, my practice is the way that I maintain my sanity on a day-to-day basis, let alone when I'm traveling from place to place over a 2.5 month period. So to me, my practice is really, it's of a great necessity at this point. And it does not look the way that it used to. There was a period of time where I was very much like digging into my asana practice in a really serious way. And it was like, I would practice for hours. If I could practice, I would practice for as long as I possibly could. And even now, I mean, I relish days when I have the time to practice for like 2 hours. That to practice for 2 hours now is like a luxury, because just like everyone else, like even before this tour, I doing the work that comes along with being an online yoga teacher who travels around the world, there's a lot of administrative work that goes along with that. So really, I work a desk job in addition to being a yoga teacher. And even on a day-to-day basis, I still have to alter my practice depending on what's going on in my professional life in the same way that anyone does. And so those kinds of that kind of understanding of it has been very helpful in this transition to like a completely mobile time period. But I don't really feel as though, like, I'm definitely looking forward to being at home and being able to just practice normally, like get back on my regular schedule. But there is no real normal to life. Everything is always changing. So this has been a really beautiful lesson in understanding that I cannot control everything, and I just have to allow the practice to flow and to move and to melt and to change with how my life is moving.
Mm. Thank you for that
Thank
description.
you.
As I was traveling with you on the road and sensing some of the experience, and my yoga practice was just to ride with you with that and hope everyone else had a lovely journey too, that I come to notice that, yeah, in the peaks and in what seems to be cool and groovy, there's also some ripples that are not, which are, in a sense, the waves or the chatter or the disruptions in our life. And so even when something seems really cool, it doesn't mean that it's always groovy. And
Mm.
that there is efforts along the way, even working these two muscles in lip asana to not respond when someone asks a question that is really more of a baiting question, to expose you rather than to enhance you. Someone asks you, fat, black, yoga, what's up? As if
Mhm.
like you have to defend yourself, as opposed to thin, white, privilege, what's up? That it could be so different. So the other pearl that I was just wondering about, after how are we challenging ourselves, what are we teaching, and then the other element is, what is the messaging that we're delivering? Uh, how are we delivering our message? And in that sense, it's not just a class, it's considering how we're delivering our message to ourselves each day. How are we practicing our own accessible yoga? And that's where, when you say you have a desk job, people may be listening and saying, oh, I thought Jessamyn was this. I thought Jessamyn was this renowned author making all these appointments and being the number one thing to do. I saw in a magazine of 100 things to do when I was getting my hair cut last week. And there you were, the number one thing to do is to tune into Jessamyn's channel. And that was really wonderful. It's like, oh, good. I'll be speaking to her
Mhm.
soon. So the media is finding you and sharing your message at least in ways that are mainstream. And that's beautiful because you may not always be trying to do that, but the message is out there. So that's really wonderful. Viewers and listeners, I'm going to put a little plug in again for our Yoga Fest Raleigh. I'm going to ask Amnon to show Low Range in just a little bit, our mascot and chicken. So she'll be on shortly in case you've been wondering where Lorraine is. Ah, well, hello, lady. So she's at our Well-Fed Community Garden, which will be on June 17th. I've enjoyed some of Lorraine's eggs, I believe, over the time period. And behind her is where we had today's beats drawn from. So let's get back to Jessamyn, though, because we're soon going to have to beat it off the show, and would like to share some of her perspectives of adjusting from a desk job to being on the road. How do you negotiate a life shift like that?
I mean, there's no, so when I say that I work a desk job, I'm saying that, so in addition to being a yoga teacher and being a writer, I'm also my assistant and my manager, and I'm the person who books everything. I'm the person who organizes everything, and all of that is a desk job. So to me, I'm very, very, very lucky and blessed to work for myself so that I can really change. I don't have to be in one specific location. I do have an office in Durham, but I don't have to be there. So I can take, as long as I have my computer and as long as I have an internet connection, then I can do the work that I need to do from all over the world. So it's basically about just cutting out, setting up the time and really prioritizing things in a very specific way. And there's a level of attention to detail that has to be present if you're going to do any kind of entrepreneurial work. I know you know, and it's like, I think that for me, that kind of transition is made easier by the fact that I don't have to physically be in the same location all the time. But there are some things that I do need to be in my office to do. Bookkeeping is a great example of that. And so the only, like, I'll, during the tour, I've been at home for very short periods of time, like usually 2-day stints. And so during those 2-day stints, all of my friends are like, let's hang out. And my parents are like, come visit. And I'm like, I have to be at my office doing bookkeeping right now because otherwise, like, my taxes are not going to be paid. So it's a lot of things like that. It's just management. But what human being isn't doing management of to some degree all the time? And I'm very, I don't have a family. Like, I don't have children that have to be taken care of. And so I'm in an ideal situation to be able to just kind of make my life what it needs to be. But it's definitely, it's more administration than spending time on a yoga mat. I think that people think that I must like spend my whole day practicing yoga or something. I'm like,
Right.
I don't know why you would think that.
Well, and you are. It's just there's 8 limbs to choose from.
Exactly. But I think that because the mindset about the practice is so limited in our society, especially whenever people are like, "Wow, she loves yoga," they're like, "So you love going to yoga class?" And I'm like, "No, I'm practicing yoga in this conversation. Like, I'm practicing yoga in the way that I breathe. I'm practicing yoga. It is a nonstop 24/7 365 100% attachment to the practice.
Staying focused takes effort, and breathing takes intention. So there's lots to go with that. Also, when I attended your book reading at Quail Ridge in Raleigh back in
Hmm.
April before Yoga Fest, you cited a pose that really took you years ago, and I elbowed Shannon, my media assistant, because I said, I've been practicing that pose for a way, way long time, and I still practice that pose, and it's a very obtuse pose, but it's a side-lying dancer's pose. And I practice that most days as part of my physical practice because I have left and right disparities, and having the ground for support and referencing is a wonderful element. So I just thought that it's great to have that common perspective of whatever our body is, whether you can call yours a plus size, but you have youth and flexibility, and mine's more precocious in age, and I have arthritis. That pose was a common inspiration and continuum that is very accessible, whether you're seated, standing, or reclining. So
I love I love that expression so much, precocious with age. I'm gonna steal that. I think that's amazing. I love it.
well, I had to retire from my dental career at 52 because of arthritis, and I actually
Oh, yes.
so I had to change dramatically, and fortunately, I was on a yoga path. That might have been in everybody yoga era uh, that before it changed names, and then I'm because of all my rehabilitative and adjustments, I feel healthier and sharing yoga in ways that I don't have to be physical about. And you're part
Yeah.
of it today, so that's beautiful too. So tell us again where the website is and any other
Yes.
ways to best connect with you because though people aren't engaging via the media today, despite thousands of viewers, it's there's other times to connect with you. What would be optimal?
Yeah. So JessamynStanley.com is going to be the best place to find my teaching schedule, both both online and live. It is the best place to find the book. And if you're looking for any of my social media channels, you can find me at My Name is Jessamyn or at Jess Not Jazz, and that's jazz spelled like the music, Jazz.
Just not jazz.
Yes.
Do you ever play jazz in any of your programming?
I don't. I don't typically play music at all, but I do. A lot of people call me Jasmine, and so I said I'm just not jazz. Jessamyn, not Jasmine.
Ah, gotcha,
Yeah.
gotcha. Well, let's share a little bit about the non-music in your instruction because I feel similarly about that because of cognition issues or
Yeah.
familiarity of process or mind-body disconnect. Uh,
Yeah.
what do you feel?
Yeah, it's very ironic because in my personal practice, I listen to music quite a lot, but that's my personal practice. I feel like that I really enjoy it in my own classes, but I have found it to be very distracting in a group environment. As much as I love it, I think that for many people, they're just trying to find a connection with their breath. And it's very distracting to have music playing when that's happening, especially if it's like you're already intimidated by the experience. There's people, it seems like everyone else knows what to do and you don't know what to do. And I feel like it's really important to focus attention on the breath because ultimately, even if you never get out of Shavasana, that breath is all that really matters. So I want to make space for people to really be able to hear their breath and to focus on that because I think that that's going to create a connection that, you know, once you've got that connection, you can listen to music, you can do all kinds of things, you can hear all kinds of sounds while you're practicing, but it's really important to establish that connection to the breath. And I don't want to do anything to inhibit that experience.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Yeah, is that kind of what you were,
yeah,
or how do you feel?
it's an endeavor just to be there,
Yeah.
and my perspective is over time people are just so caught up in being distracted in the midst of attempting to focus that there's perpetual chatter. Uh, so I've gotten away even from listening to satellite radio and driving with only a limited amount of music on. I have enough thoughts to process and to pay attention to what I'm doing because there's enough people not paying attention out there that
Exactly.
it's for my
Exactly.
safety it's essential. I've already got enough physical problems. I don't need any accidents. So that,
Exactly. Totally. Totally.
so
I
I could
couldn't
appreciate
agree more.
so I could appreciate all that. Well, viewers and listeners, we've had a lovely opportunity to share Jessamyn Stanley. We'll be on
Yes.
the Nissan Communications archive for YouTube in about an hour, and that you could reach Jessamyn through her media channels. Of course, it's easy to remember Jess, not Jazz. So we're going to thank Jessamyn for tuning in this morning on a road trip from Boston. We
Thank you so
appreciate.
much for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for expressing your heart and modeling for others what is possible in your growth. It's a beautiful
Yes.
experience. I was just stay on. I'd like to talk to her after the show. Viewers and listeners, next week we have Nishala Devi, who I met at the Accessible Yoga Conference recently. She instructed several classes, one of which I was even more inspired by, which was using languaging and imagery for healing, as well as part of her training in chronic disease and cancer. So please consider tuning in next week, same time, 10 o'clock Eastern, for Nisha Devi. I had to say that twice because I worked very hard not to abominate it, I hope. And we'll get back to Jessamyn Stanley. Thank you, Jessamyn. We look forward to your return safely to Durham and sharing with the community.
Thanks.
Namaste.
Namaste.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.